Good afternoon. This is Ann Carey, Assistant Director, Alumni Relations, and welcome to the Spring 2014 Career Webinar Series. We are pleased you are joining us today for the audience-focused interview, Tailor Your Message and Connect with All Stakeholders to Land the Job, with Sarah Stambouli, Stambouli Career Consulting. Our webinar is being recorded today. The slides are available to alumni via HBS LIFA login. Go to www.alumni.hbs.edu/events, then click on the tab labeled Past Events. Today's presentation will be 60 minutes and will include audience questions. To submit a question, locate the floating toolbar in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Click on the question mark button to open the Q&A panel. Type your question in the space at the bottom, then click the Send button. We will not be able to address every question in the course of today's presentation, but we will attempt to address the sentiments expressed by the majority of you. Please note that your questions will not be viewable by other attendees. At this time, I'll turn the presentation over to Sarah Stambouli.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be talking about this topic. It's a new one for me, and I will do my best to stick to information that you haven't heard 1,000 times before in lists of interview tips. So I'm excited to get started. We are going to begin with a poll, so you get used to participating, because I'd really love you to participate as much as possible by submitting questions, and so this will get you all warmed up. Anne, were you going to go ahead with that?
Yes, so we would like to start with a poll, and you will see on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen near the Q&A box a polling box, and there we'd ask you to respond to this question. Which best describes the role that you are targeting compared to your current or most recent role? Option A, similar to mine but with an upgrade, similar job function or industry but with a promotion or raise, nicer boss, more staff, more flexibility, or shorter commute. Option B, fairly different, a different job function or industry. Or option C, very different, i.e. a different job function and industry.
Okay, so let us know if you're job hunting or when you're job hunting, how different your role would be from your current one by just clicking away, and we'll give you the results fairly soon. We have some very smart people at Harvard Business School carefully counting and adding these up by hand in our special polling workshop room. Okay. And the reason this is important is the best techniques for your job search vary depending on whether you're looking for something quite different or not. Traditional methods work relatively well if you are looking for something quite similar, not so much if you're not. Okay, well, that was very fast. Okay, so we're mainly in the middle there. I don't know if everybody can see this, but 30% are looking for something quite similar. And I would say for you 30%, that job postings and using recruiters and the traditional job market will be more applicable to you, but I would also encourage you to use the hidden job market as well. Group B, 49%, up to half of you, are looking to make a pretty significant change. And I would say a lot of the hidden job market tips that I will reference where you can learn more about would apply to you. And then 21%, big change, completely different, in which case I would say the traditional job market is probably not something you should be spending much of your time on. So that's why I was interested to look at this. So you're in the right place. Fantastic. Okay. There we go. So actually, before I go too far into that, I did want to reference that you have access to a fabulous webinar library as alumni of Harvard Business School, and there's two webinars that I did before that I would encourage you to watch if you can bear this one. One of them it's the Hidden Job Market 1 and 2, and the first one talks about how to get a meeting, like an exploratory or informational interview meeting, exactly how to do that, and the second one talks about when you've got an exploratory meeting, how to turn it into a job offer. And this sort of, it could be almost thought of as the third in the series, though not officially, is talking about sort of more advanced interview techniques to help you be the candidate of choice. Okay, so what we're talking about here is two aspects of interviewing: keeping the focus on the person who's interviewing you in a very kind of devoted way, as opposed to keeping the focus on selling yourself. And then the other aspect of it is keeping the focus very strongly on the work that you will be doing, as opposed to the work that you did in your last job. So if you take a look at these columns, in a traditional interview, you're answering questions and you're just trying to do a really good job. And so you're doing most of the talking. And this method, I'm recommending you do as little talking as possible, which sounds a bit counterintuitive, but we'll explain. And instead of writing up and planning your answers really carefully, you'll be planning the questions you're going to ask to keep the interview as conversational as possible. And so instead of trying to answer questions fantastically and state all the wonderful, fabulous things you did in your last job, you're showing your expertise in another way. And the last thing is, you're really, by keeping the focus on them, you're leaving them feeling like you really get them and understand them, and there will be a connection that will work even better than answering questions perfectly. Okay. And so the other aspect, and I'm just sort of spelling this out a little bit, is focusing on the work. And I think this is a great technique at any point in an interview when you get a little off track, or you feel like maybe you're not sure you answered a question well, or maybe you're babbling. That would be me. I'd be the babbler. And you're trying to get back on track, to focus on the work they need done, their to-do list, and the reason that they're hiring you. So keeping the focus on the work, and this technique works really well when you're meeting with the boss or the boss's boss, or someone who has a stake in that work being done well. And so that's what we talk about here on the left. So it's also really a great technique to take the focus off anything that you don't want the focus on. So let's say the bulk of you are making a reasonably significant change in the kind of work. So chances are you've not done the job that you will be interviewing for before, which makes you kind of technically not really the greatest candidate from a traditional point of view, even though you're obviously crazy smart and are going to be able to do this job. The more you're talking about the work they need done in an intelligent, thoughtful way, clearly having spent a lot of time thinking about it and thinking about how you could add value, the less they're going to notice that you haven't actually done that exact job before. It also can take the focus off a gap in your resume, anything that isn't perfect. So, and again, those of you who are looking more in the same area will find that this method will be helpful, and the traditional method will also be. Okay. So one thing that's a little different in this method is that there's a huge emphasis on research ahead of time, really trying to find out every single thing you can about the work they need done and the person you'll be meeting with, in a way that's quite different from just sort of studying the company in that way. So, and it's a continuous process through the interview process. So unless we're going to give up and work at helping people get some fast food a little faster, chances are you're going to have a lot of interviews. And so it's a process. So the idea is you do all the research you can before the first meeting. You ask more questions during the meeting. You continue to figure out what you didn't know, and every interview you're learning more. And it's a kind of a continuous process, trying to figure out everything you would need to know. So I put some detailed slides in here so that you would have them if you wanted to reference them online once they're posted. So I won't go into too much of the detail, but tremendous amount of deep understanding of the business model. Even if it's a not-for-profit, there's still sort of a business model in that they're getting grants and donations and they have expenses. Just really understanding it. If it's a product you can try, you've tried it, you've gone there, you've done everything you can. Another thing you want to at least take a stab at understanding is the department. This is one of the things that smart people overlook the most, is really almost like you want to be able to draw on a work chart. And the reason for that is if your job search stalls at this company, but they like you, you'll know who to suggest you meet with next. And as I'm sure many of you know, LinkedIn is a great treasure trove of information about the person that you'll be meeting with, studying the interviewer. So you can find out all the obvious things, their last few jobs, their career trajectory, their awards, but you can also get a sense for some of the more subtle things, the stuff that may not be politically correct but can still help you in how to present yourself in a way that they're going to like. So really think about them. You know, did they go to fancy schools? Did they kind of pull themselves up by their bootstraps? Do they have a CFA? You know, you don't want to sort of sound, smarter than they do all the time. And you just want to use what's going to work, something you can connect on. And so take a look at all these things and spend some time thinking about what they might like in a candidate and what you might be what the best thing for you to emphasize. Okay. Depending on industry, people have a very varying amounts of information online. There's some types of jobs where if you weren't on Twitter, they would think you were not qualified, and some where they're like, what, Twitter? So definitely take a look. You never know. And while a lot of the focus of what I'll be talking about is assuming that you're going to be meeting with someone in the business line that you will be in, so it won't be HR unless you're interviewing for an HR job. You actually can find out a tremendous amount. A lot of times when you are meeting with an HR person, you'll actually find they will have more information online than a lot of the people on the line. So that's one upside to that. And you never know. People just manage to not lock down their Facebook accounts, and in certain industries, people are tweeting, and you really get a broader sense of what someone's about. So it can be helpful. Okay. And for those of you that are making these big changes, and that's 70% of you, I very much encourage you to make sure you're not skipping informational interviews before you get your real interviews. And by this, I mean traditional informational interviews where it's just about information and you're not like secretly trying to get the job. Because even if you think that you understand what people do in the new role, because maybe you interacted with them in your old role, there's a certain level of being an insider that you probably don't know as well as you should. So I really encourage you to make sure to have those meetings with your peers at other organizations. You'll just be so much stronger. Okay. So are there any questions yet, Anne?
Hi, Sarah. Yes, we do have some questions coming in.
Okay.
First question. Sometimes with private companies, it's hard to know anything about the interviewer's role or the company. Are there a set of basic questions that will help to ask which could limit our looking disinterested or not on the ball?
Okay, that's a very good point. And so I would say traditionally the areas where people tend to have less online presence are hedge funds, law, and it really could just be anybody, or they have such a common name that you can't figure out which one is them, and that's absolutely the case. I think in that case, even if you wouldn't need to otherwise, it's a good idea to try and have an informational interview with somebody who's done the job before, or to just focus on the work that they need done. And even if you can't get that great a sense of that because there's not really a job description and it's all very vague, then I would say make a guess, come up with a hypothesis about the work they might be done, and then go into the interview with your assumptions and then questions to clarify your assumptions. And that will get them talking and telling you the basics of the work they need done and what they care about. And you'll be all set. Is there anything
Great,
else?
thanks, Sarah.
Yes,
we do have a couple more questions. Someone's writing in saying, having done research on an interviewer, how can one bring up aspects that are common, for example, school attended or a volunteer group, without looking as if they stalked them?
That's an interesting question, and I think nowadays people are less concerned about that stalking aspect and think it's kind of normal. So I think it probably, the safest way to say is something like, I was really excited about this meeting, and I took a look on LinkedIn, and I saw that we both went to Michigan or Harvard Business School. And to just say it right up front, I think it's fine. I think that the concern about the stalking is less there, unless you really were kind of finding something very obscure about their kids or something, in which case I would just maybe don't bring it up and just keep in mind that they're a parent too, and you might, a reference to that might be not a problematic thing.
Thanks, Sarah. Let's take one more and then let you return to your talk. So finally, someone's asking, what about Glassdoor, the website? And they're saying to me, it's often even more useful than Twitter.
Oh, Glassdoor is tremendously helpful to get a sense about, especially in a structured interview situation. So while these techniques are more for meeting with the boss and trying to actually make it go quite unstructured, it can be a great way to find out about how the human resources department and companies that do have structured interviews, what questions they ask. And sometimes you can get them word for word and be very ready. I would still encourage you to figure out ways to get the interviewer talking, answer their question and then end with a question, to try and get them talking and to have it be more conversational. But I think it can be great, and it's also really helpful, can be helpful with negotiation. And the closer you are to the more recently you graduated, there tends to be more information about the roles you'll be going for there. But I would always say to look there.
Great, thanks, Sarah. We'll let you continue.
Okay. All right. So we've just finished up talking about the research. So you've done everything you can to really know about the interviewer, but also know about the work. Have an exact idea, and you could be wrong, but you've at least attempted to figure out exactly what projects might they want me to do. What might the interviewer's point of view be? So, for instance, I had a client who said, oh, I'm interviewing at a particular hedge fund. He's like, unlike most of them, they all have these scrappy backgrounds. They're kind of like off-the-street kind of guys. So I'm going to tell them about how my brother was a cop, and I'm going to be all like working class guy. And I said, really? What's the name of the person you're meeting with? And it just so happened that he was right in general about the organization, but this guy had his famous prep school and famous schools. He'd maybe gone to Dartmouth for undergrad and so forth. And he wasn't that way at all. And his brother probably wasn't a cop. And so it was a great example of just, being aware of that. And thinking a little bit about the work the interviewer needs done will help you know what questions to ask to get them talking. So you're basically just coming up with your hypotheses before you get started. And the idea is that what's the gap between what I know now, which might be very little and might be quite a bit if you have a detailed job description, it's a job you've done before, or someone who has the job. What would I need to know to write out a business plan for how I would do this job? Not at all that you should know, but what would you need to know? And those are the kind of things to help you figure out what to ask during the interview. The reason there's a bunch of very specific reasons why asking questions, as opposed to answering questions very well, can be a better technique. It keeps them talking. The more people like people who listen to us. That's why I'm deeply, deeply in love with each and every one of you, because you're listening to me exclusively. It's fantastic, right? How often do you get an hour to just babble? Okay. And for those of you that are, another reason why the interviewer will fall in love with you if you're listening to them talk is it's so rare that people really have your undivided attention. So those of you who are multitasking right now, you're breaking my hearts. See what happens if you try just listening. And it's just a rare thing nowadays. So the other advantage of asking the questions is that it keeps the focus on the work that they need done. So if I'm I'm much more interested in talking as the boss to be. If my to-do list and the things I need this new hire to do are deeply interesting to me and important, that's why I'm going to all the bother of hiring someone. I desperately need it done. I desperately need this person to come in, take this work off my plate, make me look good, help me make my numbers, help me get my bonus, whatever. And it's really important to me. Whereas if you're talking about your accomplishments elsewhere, that are probably relevant, and I'm sort of interested in theory. It's not as interesting. And even if you think they seem very similar, I may not get it so much. And if you're talking about what you did elsewhere, you're basically bragging, which is okay on an interview, absolutely. But another way to make me see how much you know about the job is asking detailed questions that only somebody who'd done this job before and really got it could ask. It's a way of looking crazy smart without sounding boring. So, all right. And then again, I just want to emphasize a little more the details of the idea of the business plan. So, I said in the little teaser ad for this webinar, I said, find out the question that you should answer, even if they don't ask. And the question that you want to answer, maybe not in the first interview, maybe in the first interview, is why should you hire me? Like, how am I going to be able to be a profitable hire for you? So if I'm a salesperson, it's obvious. If I want you to pay me $250,000, I've got to bring in a lot more than $250,000 and all the rest of my costs, a lot more to make it a profitable hire for you. But if I'm in the risk department or I'm an analyst, it's a little less clear. But it's a great exercise, and it will ultimately make you interview better to figure out what you would have to achieve for them to make it profitable to pay your salary. Even if you're in HR, a lot of you aren't going to be in cost centers, and there's still a way to do it. So what I would say is to think, okay, you want to figure out what would they pay me, what would my total cost be, how would the work I do add enough value to this organization, and do the numbers. And of course, yes, you are pulling them out of you-know-where. Absolutely, you have no idea, but just thinking about it and coming up with some crazy plan will actually make you focus on the better things during your interview. So here's a little outline. It's just fun to do because you're so making it up at the beginning, but over time you'll sort of get it. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about today's case. And our interviewee today is Jessica. And Jessica is looking for a position as a director of strategy and operations for an online media or e-commerce company. She's looking for something where she'll oversee revenue growth, streamline costs, and implement cross-departmental processes. So, her recent work history. She worked at Media Bistro for the last 8 years during the time it went from a startup to a public company. So obviously she added a lot of value. She was promoted several times and reached the position of Director of Education Operations, where she oversaw the continuing education department, a strong e-commerce revenue generator for the company. Her position was recently eliminated. Well, just for the record, I love Jessica, and I got bored reading that, okay? And you probably got bored listening to it. So there's a great reason why you want to keep the focus on their work, okay? So if Jessica were to do this analysis, she would want to show, let's just give some kind of round number. They're going to pay her $150,000. The rest of her benefits might be $50,000, and let's throw in another $50,000 for the fabulous 16 monitors she's going to have and all the wonderful equipment. And so she would want to show that she could bring in more than $250,000 a year in value in some way. So in a role like this, it's kind of interesting because it hits the revenue side and the cost side. So she would think about, well, what kind of work would they have me do? What could I do that would, on the short term, bring in more revenue, and on the long term, set the stage to get more revenue? How might that play out? How much in each year? What products might it be? What would that have to look like? What form would that come in? Corporate subscriptions, advertising? And then on the cost side, okay, let's say I make everything crazy more efficient. How is that going to save money? Are we going to not have to hire someone? We would, because I found some smart way to make it happen, et cetera. Like really thinking it through. It's very sobering, by the way. I would have a hard, makes you really think about what you do at work all day. Okay. All right. So here's Jessica's upcoming interview. It's basically a job that hits the strategy, the revenue side for Crane's New York business, director of online and e-commerce strategy, and it hits the operation side and the cost side. So she'd be doing a little bit of all of it. And we're going to talk a little bit about how she would make this happen. So here's a little bit of her interview preparation. So the first thing she would do is make an initial guess about factors influencing the interviewer's point of view. And we're going to tell you all about the interviewer. Then we're going to make a guess at the interviewer, who happens to be a woman, her work needs. Attempt to show, do that little spreadsheet that I just talked through for you guys. Figure out how she could test those hypotheses in the interview. Like, did she guess right about what the woman or the department needs done? And then plan out some questions to show how much she knows about this kind of work. Now, it doesn't mean that she wouldn't also tell a few hero stories and talk about all the great things she did at Media Bistro, because she did. But this would be the extra thing. This is a value add that you guys don't already know about, because I'm sure you know about the rest of it. Okay. So I just thought I would check in. Are we good with the questions, Anne?
Sarah, we do have a couple more questions that folks would like to ask.
Okay, I thought we could take an extra break. All right.
Sure, if this is a good time. So first of all, can you share some effective techniques in getting the exploratory interview?
Okay, well, the one of the webinars is 100% about that. But in terms of getting getting those meetings, the way that I recommend doing it is actually on this exact same theme. So instead of writing a normal cover letter or cover email, the way that my clients have success doing this is writing an email that's almost 100% about them and not about you. And it is possible to do. It's a lot of work, though. So basically, she would be writing to this woman who we happen to know, the name is Jill, and Jessica would talk about why she was so interested in Crane's New York, why she thought it would be such an exciting job to help grow that business, why she admires what Jill's already done. She'd do a lot of stalking, as it were, to try and figure out what to say in that. It's almost like it represents, the email is almost more like a fan letter that you'd write to your favorite, music star if you were 12 or 10. Then here's why I think you're so great. Here's why I'm so interested in you. Here's all the cool things I know that you did, and I would like to meet with you. And by the way, in the second not the first paragraph, I'm mentioning that I'm this, rock star HBS alum who's, crazy smart and qualified, but not overly emphasizing that. And the way I recommend you also don't include your resume, so that it's really a discussion. And I actually recommend that people contact the hiring manager this way, even when you know there is a job posting. So you certainly could apply to the job posting, but you would send this as if you hadn't. In other words, just trying to get the meeting, it sets the stage for it to be much more exploratory and much more conversational. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about how Jessica might prepare for this. So I'll show you some of the details. Oh, sorry, you had another question, Anne?
We do. So in terms of the questions coming mostly from the person who's looking for the job, someone's writing in saying, if I'm asking most of the questions, can it backfire in that the interviewer thinks, why is the candidate interviewing me?
It could, if it sounds like an inquisition. And so one thing is to ask them in kind of a very general way, so and relaxed. Most people's tendency, mine included, is to ask a question in a long, throwing in every detail, and then to ask like a subset, like rephrase it and say basically the same thing. And a much more relaxed way to do it is saying something like, I'd love to hear more about what your team's working on right now. Or let's say it's a tech security company. Oh my God, how about that Heartbleed? Like you just go like Heartbleed. Oh my God, you guys must be swamped. And then don't say anything. It takes a lot less to get people talking than people think. And if they seem quite anxious to get to some pre-planned list of questions, then that's a clue. Don't do it. Don't do this too much. And definitely make sure you answer their question. Maybe follow up with, end your answer with a question to get them talking a bit, but not too much, not every time. And definitely accept that it's going to be a bit more of a traditional interview.
Thanks, Sarah. We have more questions, but we'll hold them until your next Q&A.
Okay, great. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a real example. So here are some sample questions that are generic. Like the idea of this is that there are no generic questions because everything's going to be about that person and that team and that company and their work needs. But here's just some ideas of stuff to get you started at the beginning. And just taking a look at these questions, asking about their challenges is a great way. The fifth one there, can you describe who's in the department, is a question that people tend to skip because it seems kind of dumb, but it's actually hugely important because trying to figure out who their boss is and who the other key decision makers are, those are the people you want to get your next meeting with. So if they get they liked you, but they just got busy, it's sort of a way of trying to figure out who you're trying to jar their, just get their attention a bit. So give them a little poke to get those meetings set up. And the second to last one is super important question to ask something like that because it gets them all fired up about this hire in general. And half the time people don't get the job, not because someone else got it, but because they just sort of never took action on the hire because they're so busy they didn't have time to hire anybody. So getting them excited about what this new person could do is always a good technique. Okay, so those are there. And then here are some specific questions. So these are kind of random, but they are things that might be appropriate for Jessica to ask of the hiring manager at Cranes. Has your priority been the consumer subscription business? So that's like a hypothesis she might be thinking about, or might be for the new hire. Would it be that? Now, if she's right, great. Hopefully the manager will elaborate. If she's wrong, it's not going to make her look dumb. It's not something she could have known. Why? Why do we know that? Because she did so much homework. If she could have known, she would have known. So she probably would have actually been able to figure that out somehow because a lot of these products are public, but we only spent so much time on this. And people like making that, you'd think, so let's say the hiring manager says, you'd think it would be the consumer subscription business. That's what my predecessor is focusing on, but I actually think the corporate subscription business. And then hopefully the manager would go on about the promise of the corporate subscription business, not thinking that was a dumb question at all. And so, what are your thoughts regarding a corporate product line if you hadn't brought that up? So these are quite general. And, asking about vendors or services and those kind of details. Sometimes people think, oh, I'm going for a big senior job. I'm going for an SVP job. I shouldn't be asking about these details. Sometimes they love talking about these details. And it also can be a way of really showing that you've done this before. You understand the issues, And by the way, probably not. I think it's always pretty safe that they're not that thrilled with their customer payment systems. I feel like that's a safe one. They, certainly they're not happy with the pricing. So, and it's just something that makes it clear. And then it can always be an opportunity for you to talk about how you got a new agreement, you negotiated a new agreement with your old vendor, something that once you know they're actually interested in hearing that story, or how you switched vendors and how much money you saved. Could be part of your business plan, how you save money by getting a better deal with the vendor. And again, I like this last one because it's so optimistic, because this job involved driving traffic. So asking if that, implying you're worried, you're going to do so well, you're worried about their server capacity not crashing when she gets so many more hits. It's, thinking about what would be the equivalent question for you can be a great way to go as well. So, so here's a little bit about Jessica's interviewer. So there she is. This is what we found online. Her name's Jill Kaplan. She's the publisher and vice president at Crane's New York business. From LinkedIn, Jessica learned she'd been there almost 8 years. That's great. Why? For those of you that are keeping really good attention, Jessica was at her last place 8 years. So this isn't someone who's going to think that's weird. And prior to that, she was a general manager at the Wall Street Journal and an advertising manager at The Economist. Well, if you actually look at her LinkedIn, the other thing that comes up is that her background, Jill's, publisher, unless you're in the business, you might not know what kind of role it is, but Jill's background could have been a bit more operational. Often that's a fairly operational role, but Jill's background is actually much more sales oriented, much more account manager oriented, whereas Jessica's is more operations oriented. That's a great thing. So you could think, well, we don't have that much in common, she won't like me. But I think it's the opposite. I think Jill's going to love Jessica, because my guess is that Jill's a big picture person and a salesperson and doesn't like those boring details, but knows they're important because she's smart and that's why she rose up higher, and that she's going to be thrilled to know that Jessica is great at building business and think strategically, but also is not going to be annoyed or drop the ball on all the details that need to get done as well. Okay, so that's what Jessica learned just from LinkedIn. So then, but she didn't stop there. Sometimes it's easy to forget about everything else when you get a good amount of information on LinkedIn, but just Googling works as well. Now, Jill Kaplan's a pretty common name, but we figured out which one it was, and we were able to find out a few more things about her. So we got her wedding announcement. Maybe there is something that Jessica had in common with her husband. But now we got the mother lode, the jackpot. Jessica found a video interview with her speaking at the Women of Influence Networking Forum. Interviews are fantastic. Print interviews, video interviews, because they often ask people just talk about all the things that you want to know about what style they have, what they like in candidates, who they like to hire, and that's exactly what happened. Jessica was able to watch a video interview with Jill where she was talking exactly about what she looks for in candidates. And so you're not always so lucky, but what a shame to miss it if that kind of information is out there. Okay. And I just wanted to take a minute to go over a few general tips as well that I have discovered from, working with candidates for many, many, many years that isn't specifically about this, but is sort of general interview-focused tips. So one thing I've noticed is that the more senior people get, the more as they move up, and of course, if you're interviewing with someone more senior than you, the more likely it is that they are going to be a big picture kind of person. And in addition, they don't know the details of your job. And one thing I notice when I do interview practice with people, especially anyone with sort of any kind of detail orientation, is that they tend to dive into the details and speak very quickly. And they don't realize that the person listening hasn't heard this before, and they're trying to absorb it. And they also don't know what you're talking about. And it's always important to set the stage first. So a summary sentence, and ideally something with a positive spin to it. Another thing is, everyone knows don't badmouth your boss. But what people don't realize is how much the interviewer is still identifying with your boss. So whatever you're saying about that boss, it's like you're saying it about them because they don't know you yet. So that neutrality really isn't ideal. You actually really want to be raving about that person if you possibly can, if your nose won't grow too much. And then the last bullet, I just want to say, these are just things I've learned over time. Everybody likes. They're just, don't worry about their personality, your personality. Almost everybody wants a positive candidate who's in love with the subject matter, who gets excited talking about it. Because people think if you love it, you'll be good at it. And while work-life balance might be something that people talk about, nobody really minds a workaholic working for them. So any reference to, working hard or staying up all night to get something done is going to go over better than you might think. And everybody likes a candidate who's got amazing people skills. And finally, emphasizing loving the technology associated with your industry is always a good thing. If the person interviewing you is technical themselves, then they just value it. And if they're not technical, they think, oh, good, he can be the one who goes to that committee about what software we're choosing. So I just want to throw those in. Okay. And so here are some of the questions that I can talk with Jessica about if we have some time. But first, I thought we might sort of go over the new and the old way on how we did this. Okay, so please send questions. We're going to have some questions at the end, but now I'm going to just talk with Jessica, who just happens to have dropped by, about, and so did Jill actually. So we're gonna just show you how this might be just one quick question. Okay, so here goes. So Jessica, nice to meet you. I'm Jill Kaplan.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Happy to. So tell me about yourself.
All right, so the old version of me, pre-Sarah, I spent the last 8 years at Media Bistro, where I oversaw the continuing education department. I was responsible for planning, schedule, and promoting several hundred classes a year on topics ranging from novel writing to web design to PR. I also oversaw a team of 5 direct employees and also handled budget, finance reports, and operations.
So thinking about this new way of doing it, I'm Jill again. So Jessica, tell me about yourself.
Well, the reason I'm so excited to talk to you about this role, which is growing Crane's online business, is that I spent my career building e-commerce products for online media companies that led to revenue growth. From what I understand, you're looking for a strategist who also excels at implementation, someone who will make sure the right processes are in place for your stakeholders to support growth. Is that right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I'm glad that you kind of, sounds like you really get what we need. What we really need, we need to diversify our revenue sources. And I just don't have the time to supervise the details of any new initiatives. So now, the new Jessica would say,
is part of that diversification increasing your consumer and corporate subscription revenue to complement your advertiser revenue?
That's right. We have some great products, but they aren't getting the traction they could, that they would if we had some better audience development.
So it sounds like an immediate focus would be on new marketing campaigns and better outreach, and perhaps a greater focus on partnerships. Can you tell me a little bit about your current partnerships?
Great question. Yeah. Well, you're actually reminding me how much we need to focus on this. Where I left things, we've got a couple that I can tell you about in a minute, but I tried to get a partnership going with Bloomberg, and it was very promising. And then, we had a resignation, and I had some things that I just had to attend to, and I really kind of dropped the ball, to be honest. And so I feel like that's very low-hanging fruit, and somebody that could really take the ball and and run with it when it comes to partnerships like something like picking up the Bloomberg, but also lots of other ones. That's exactly what we need. Yeah. And I would be, and at that point, I would be beaming at Jessica. And I hope that it was obvious that those questions that she asked are questions that only someone who'd really understood the business would think to ask. And so she didn't have to tell me a hero story of what she did at Media Bistro, though it would be fine if she did later on. She showed her expertise while keeping it on my work and my to-dos. And I, as Jill, felt like she really gets us and gets what we need, and that she wouldn't need a lot of training. She could hit the ground running. So I hope that gave you a little taste of interviewer and work-focused interviewing and how it might be a little bit different. And it's not the complete picture of all things interviewing, but it's just one way of making yourself the more likable candidate and to connect with your interviewer so that they pick you and that you have an easier time in the interview process. Are there any questions, Anne?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. There are some more questions coming in. And now is the time if you'd like to submit your own personal question. We have a few more minutes. So let's start with this one. What are some good ways to ask questions that reveal the company's attitude towards work-life balance or flex work while conveying that I am a hard worker? For instance, I'm pregnant with my first child and would like flex hours overtime maybe in 2 or 3 years.
Okay, that's a great question. One thing that I might ask is something in a general way about the rhythm of the work that might reveal it. So you might say something like, I'm sure you're very busy. How is the workflow for you? Do you find that it's pretty consistent over time, and then you have some crunch times, or ask some questions about, is there a time of the month that gets busier, or quarterly, depending on the business, or asking questions about kind of making some reference to, oh, I see you used to work at Goldman. I bet you work crazy long hours there. Is it similar here? It's a tough thing to ask, though. So I would probably recommend, if you're not getting the answer you're looking for, just waiting on that question until you're close to an offer and you're at a point where you can try and talk to other members of the team and just sort of ask them, or wait a little bit further, because while it's one of those unconscious things that even if people theoretically support a healthy lifestyle, it's just something you want to make sure you wait on the timing to if you want to get the job. It might be something I'd worry about before you take it, but not too early on.
Thanks, Sarah. We have another question. What do you mean by black belt people skills? For me, people skills are both the most natural thing I do well and the area that is most challenging. Would be eager to hear your definition of how to show and demonstrate one's people skills.
Well, there's a couple of things. One that seems silly, but is actually really very powerful, is to make a point of practically every time you mention anybody, if you are talking about your past jobs, to say something nice or that you admire them. So if they say, why do you want to leave Media Bistro? You might say, oh, I'm not even sure I do. This job is so fascinating. That's why I want to talk to you. But people are amazing at Media Bistro. My boss is just such a creative guy. He's taught me a tremendous amount, and my prior supervisor there was, such an amazing leader. Really enjoy it. So that might be a little longer than you needed. But what they're going to take away from that is that you see the best in people, that you like people, and that you probably get along well with people. That is such an important skill that when I used to run job search groups, I used to practically make everyone in the group talk about their last boss, and some of them had been fired from their job and weren't happy about it, as if they adored and admired that person, as if it was, a cross between Mother Teresa and their favorite puppy. And they'd have to smile, and we'd just kind of make them keep doing it till they could do it believably. And I'd say, you don't have to actually say that, but be aware of the difference between that and what you usually say, and you'll probably improve it. So that's one way. Another way is just a quick reference can work. So you can say something like, if you're talking about a story, you can be like, oh, we stayed up all night and we got it done. So that takes care of the work hard part. And then you can say, oh, we had this customer in Nevada. I don't know, like he was not the easiest guy to get along with, but for some crazy reason he loved me. So my boss would send me to go out because I could always kind of calm him down when he was upset. So that's a way of showing great people skills, for instance.
Thanks, Sarah. We have a question in response to the demonstration that you and Jessica just did. They're saying, however, Jill did not answer the question when you asked, tell me about yourself. The response was effective, but didn't answer the interview's question. So could it be dodging the question?
It certainly could be. We were trying to keep it brief, but she did sort of maybe in a regular example, she would have said a sentence or two more, but she did sum up. She said she was so excited about the role, but she said the reason was she'd spent her career building e-commerce products for online media companies that led to revenue growth. And so, and maybe she might have said a bit more in some subsequent questions more about herself. And certainly with a recruiter, they would want you to say a bit more. But you'd be amazed. One thing that is a great technique when you're answering questions like that is to just pause and see if they jump in or they ask a follow-up question or actually say, oh, keep going, right? Generally, the closer an external recruiter will delve in the most, and an internal recruiter, and would definitely want you to answer more thoroughly than that. But a line manager might well feel like you're talking about exactly the right thing.
Thanks, Sarah. The poll asked about this is someone writing in saying, the poll asked about our intentions. How often do companies hire senior executives from outside the industry?
Oh, such an interesting question. It varies a lot. And I would say it varies by company, and it's actually something that you could theoretically figure out if people are on LinkedIn or if you're quite senior, they're less likely to be on LinkedIn, but they're more likely to be on the company website, and just look how long they've been there. And so certain industries, like financial services, they do a lot of shuffling at the top, and others not so much. And I had an interesting example of a client who the very first email she wrote trying to get an exploratory meeting with her first choice company was HBO, and she wrote to the head of finance, who would be probably who she would report to, and it was her first cold email, and she got the meeting. And then the guy said, oh, but we don't really bring in people as senior as you very often from the outside. So it was kind of funny. However, that was just HBO. The other networks, not necessarily so, or seemed, when she spoke with them, much more likely. And so just looking around at tenure probably would be a great way to figure out which companies were more open to that. Of course, the downside of that is that they might be more open to switching you out as well. But there's always exceptions to bringing in someone senior at even places that don't do it a lot.
Thank you, Sarah. We have a final question, and then I'll leave it to you to wrap up. So our closing question, I'm sure managers get a lot of emails each day. Do you have any examples of eye-grabbing subject lines for those introductory emails to prospective employers?
Ideally, to say something you have in common when you do. So saying, friend of Jessica Yuli's, or something like that, or a fellow Michigan alum or something like that can work. But as long as the first sentence is about them, it tends to work pretty well. In fact, if the email is really focused on them, I am that confident that they work cold now that the economy is better, that if people tell me they sent 3 and they didn't get a meeting, I try and get them to show them to me because I don't believe them, that they really did it and not very, very focused on the person receiving it. That's how rarely they don't work. In fact, hang on, I'm going to just let the real Jessica answer this question for a sec. Jessica, what happened when you sent your first email cold asking for a meeting?
My first one, not a response, but after I worked with Sarah on it and I really focused on the person I was meeting with, I got a response in 32 minutes. And met with her and am now talking to their head of HR.
So it kind of was adorable because Jessica was, like most people, skeptical. So, and we were still in our meeting when she got the answer. So I wish I'd filmed it. It was kind of awesome. It doesn't always work so perfectly, though, just full disclosure. So we are at the end of our time and the end of my slides. And so I want to thank you all for sticking with this. I know webinars can be challenging because of the temptation to multitask, and so thank you. I hope that these techniques will help your interviewing success, and I wish you all the best. Harvard Business School has amazing resources for their alumni in helping you with your careers, and this webinar should be up on their website in just a few days, which is very impressive turnaround. If you want to go through and sort of read the slides and get some detail off it to help you prepare for your next interviews. So best of luck.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. This is wonderful. And for everybody listening, we hope you will join us on May 6th for our next webinar, Aging Parents, Navigating the Journey Successfully, with Janet Simpson Benvenuti, MBA 1985, and founder, CEO of Circle of Life Partners. If you are interested in hearing a recording of this presentation, please log into the alumni events page, www.alumni.hbs.edu/events. Thank you for joining us today, and have a good day.